Just go to
Hello, everybody. We'll take a few moments to have everybody come back. And on to our fifth presentation of the day. Just a reminder to use those code words. Again, this CEU will be 1 credit hour. That CEU will come electronically via email. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Lindsay. So Lindsay Moran is a social worker at the Kansas City Police Department, has been a social worker at the Kansas City Police Department since 2018. She's currently assigned to Metro Patrol Division located at 75th and Prospect. Lindsay also works closely with Special Victims Unit, where she serves as the liaison to MOXA, Children's Division, Children's Mercy, Child Protection Center, and Synergy, as a member of the multidisciplinary teams there. In addition, Lindsay is often utilized by the Violent Crimes Division to assist victims and witnesses to violent crimes, including aggravated assault and homicide. Prior to KCPD, Lindsay was a social worker in the emergency room at Children's Mercy Hospital, Adele Hall campus, where she helped implement COVER. COVER is a follow-up program partnership between KCPD Social Services and CMH Children's Mercy social workers to help meet the needs of children and families impacted by violent injuries. Lindsay has also worked as a bachelor's level social worker in the Center for Community Connections at Children's Mercy clinics on Broadway. Before her time at Children's Mercy, Lindsay worked with families involved in a Jackson County Children's Division as an intensive in-home services specialist and as a foster care case manager in Wyandotte County, Kansas. Lindsay received her bachelor's degree in social work from University of Oklahoma with a study emphasis in children and family services. Lindsay obtained a master's degree in social work from the University of Missouri, Kansas City. She's a current board member for the Kalani Foundation, a member of the KCPD CARE team, Jackson County Shoot Review participant, and a participating partner in the Safe Sleep, Safe Babies community network. Please welcome Lindsay.
Can you fit? Okay. Well, that's not too bad. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lindsay Moran. Like Katie said, I'm a social worker with the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department. I serve at our Metro Patrol Division at 75th and Prospect. I'll let you introduce yourself.
I'm Officer Saragusa with the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department. I work with Lindsay.
Excited to talk to you guys today a little bit about what it means to have a police department have a social worker embedded in a police department, how it's a little bit different than things like CIT co-responding and things like that. And then a few other things as far as kind of how as social workers we can kind of stand in the gap to start working to heal some of our communities that are dealing with frustration or concerns with police, as well as the violent communities that we're seeing, particularly on the Kansas City side. So we will get started. I don't know how to move my slide. Just okay, perfect. Okay, so our program has been around. There we go. Perfect. Our program has been around since 2016, technically, at KCPD. We started with a pilot program with one social worker. Now our current Chief Smith was the major at Center Zone at that time and felt like this was something that could be utilized and could be brought in to see if it would work. He gave her about 9 months to see how it would go. And about 6 months in, he realized we were inundated and needed more of us. At that time, the department reached out to some community groups to see if we could find some funding, and the Hall Family Foundation granted for a pilot program for 3 years, approximately 3 years. to have one of us at each patrol division. Since that time, last year, May of 2020, the city brought us on as employees with the Kansas City Police Department. So we fall under the command structure, and we're part of everything that they do there, and we're full employees of the department at this time. Just a little idea of kind of what we do. Let me see how to play that. There we go.
She works alongside us, not for us.
Officer Alex Saragusa begins every shift with partner Derek Haskell and social worker Lindsay Moran. A first-of-its-kind partnership providing social services to residents before they're in crisis.
Yeah, I hear movement in there. We're able to help these individuals in the community that we work with closely, and then they start to have a better bond with us and a better relationship.
You need more blankets or anything like that?
Yeah, I can use a blanket.
Okay. It's also emotional for us to see the officers that we get to work with. And we say the view from the back seat's very different.
It really helps us to be able to get to some families, get to some homes, get to some neighborhoods before things start to go south. Where's my high five?
Bonds are built, often
Thank
by
you.
chance,
I like your jacket. Is that new?
while on patrol.
No. I brought some friends with me today. Is that okay? We just had this kid that was out, and he came up to our car, started talking to us. We started talking to him. Air horn. You can use
That kid was 9-year-old Milo and his little brother Maddox. Milo's bike had been stolen. Officer Alex got Lindsay involved.
We found a bike for him, and when we delivered it, we started talking to them, and he went up to the door and knocked on the door and said, "Mom, the police are here. They want to talk to you." And she didn't know why we were there.
No, really, why are you here? Like,
Yeah.
I didn't do nothing. What do you want? I'm like, oh, is this a community outreach thing? They're like, no, we just liked your son. I'm like, huh? And I didn't get it. I didn't understand it.
In the months that followed, the officers have developed a friendship with this family. Now this mom and her 2 little boys have a positive relationship with police.
And then they've come back like 20 times since. They just keep coming back, and it's great. My kids love them.
Bye.
They're always excited when they get here.
Hopefully they like the toys.
It's really cool.
Let us know if you need anything.
I will, thank you.
Yeah, bye.
That's right. We still keep in touch with those kiddos and stop by. They actually live close to our station, so we swing by and check on them as much as we can. I know we're talking about, we have these code words. One of the things that we say in policing is 1023. It's 10 codes are used to talk through dispatch and on the radio to each other to let dispatch know where we are, let each other know where we are, what we're doing. And when we say that we're 1023, it means we're on scene. It means that we're at the call for service or wherever we have been asked to be. And so we've kind of turned that over in our social work team to mean that we're present and we're a part of what's going on, and that it's important to us to be 1023, whether it's with our officers or the families that we're helping or those kinds of things. So we make that reference sometimes, and I forget that the rest of the world doesn't talk in 10 codes. So that we differ in our program from several other sort of social work police involved programs. I know on some of the community mental health have CIT co-responders, and those people are generally employed by Johnson County Mental Health or Wyandotte County Mental Health, those kinds of things. Those community partnerships are essential. What makes our situation different, though, is because we are embedded in the information sharing is a little bit easier because we are employees of the department and we're linked into their computer systems and the things that they do, and we're more accessible to them. We are spending time in the car a couple of days a week, just simply responding to 911 calls. If dispatch sees something that they feel like is more appropriate for a social worker to be on, they'll dispatch. His radio number is 214, so they'll dispatch him out because I'm in the car. Or if officers get to a scene and it's something that they think needs one of us, whether it's a victim situation, child abuse, DV, whatever the officer has decided needs to have us involved, they can call us out to scene as well. So we'll be notified over the air that they need one of us to respond because they want social work on that scene. So we receive, these are kind of older numbers. We don't have our 2020 numbers in yet. We'll have that probably in February, but just our top reasons for referral by division. We do have 6 stations. We have 6 divisions. There's a social worker at each of those divisions. So it's a large city. It covers 3 counties. So we have different needs in different places, kind of depending on just kind of what's going on. So I'm in Metro Patrol. Our highest need generally is violent crime related. We spend a lot of time, I get called out often to violent crime scenes, homicide scenes, those kinds of things, to do some quick on-scene support for families, safe planning for victims if we need to, safety planning for witnesses if we need to, those kind of things. You can see up north, we deal with a lot of mental health needs, a lot of CIT stuff up north. South Patrol's got some violent crime, and then out east, housing is their biggest need. So with one of us at each station, we are covering lots of different things that are going on in each of our divisions, even just specific to our division. So for that reason, our chief makes it a point to keep our funding not grant affiliated, at least for as long as we can. He doesn't want us to end up niched into one thing, one specific area. He really wants us to be able to respond across the board to whatever, because that's what officers are seeing. That's what officers are responding to. So we get our referrals in 3 different ways. Anybody in KCPD can refer to us. Generally, it's police officers. Sometimes it's the front desk ladies. Sometimes it's the crime scene techs. It's just whoever thinks that the people that they're interacting with could benefit from having social supports. That responding for calls for service, that's the that we're in car and we are available to respond to calls for service, whether we're with our police officer partner or with if we're at the station and they need us to respond to the scene. And then also we have our weekly crime meetings at each of our divisions where, it may be a different situation that's being discussed, and one of us as a social worker feels like that's a place that we could get involved or a place that we could help. And we can receive referrals that way as well. Our top 3 reasons for referral, kind of what we discussed, but right now the trend that we're seeing citywide for our program is over a quarter of what we're doing is domestic violence related. We've had a really high increase in the lethality of domestic violence calls that we've been working. We've had some domestic violence related homicides recently. We're in a place right now where I think it's COVID and other things, but the interpersonal violence is just a big thing that's going on in our city, at least on the KCMO side right now. Child and youth assistance is another huge role for us. We do a lot of communicating with the children's division, helping get the information that they need or figure out who they need to talk to. If it's an evening or overnight call, the detective that came out to scene or answer the phone is probably not who's investigatively assigned to that case. So we're able to be that connection and figuring out who they need to talk to and who's assigned, getting information back and forth between those entities and addressing needs that way, communicating with school social workers, just whatever needs to be done. And then you'll see violent crime related, like we were saying about victim witness support on scene, safety planning, coordinating with our community partners, those kinds of things. And then we also participate in what's called risk for retaliation assessments. Our gang squad detectives do a lot of that, of figuring out who's at risk for retaliation, whether it's chronic violence, domestic violence, whether it's concerns that someone has now cooperated with the police and they may not be safe, those kinds of things. We get involved in that a lot to help making sure that we've got people what they need to be safe and to be feeling as though they're still participating in the investigative process without not feeling safe. Our top 5 accomplishments, ideally our goal across the board is to increase trust in law enforcement. That's obviously been something our country has been dealing with quite a bit over the last few years, but for quite some time. And so our role is to be out there and to be answering these calls and to be responding to the needs of the community so that they see that when they do call 911 and they need help, that no matter what that help might look like, they're going to get what they need from our department. We have some really strong community partnerships. We have our gunshot wound follow-up program with Children's Mercy. Anytime a kid is treated at Children's Mercy with a violent injury that has a KCPD case report number, they're provided information about the social service program and asked if they want to follow up from us. A lot of times that's us helping get bills paid or basic needs like groceries or items like at things that, the hospital social workers have that they're able to do inside, and then they can refer out to us for us to be able to do that. And with our partnership with them, we can kind of wrap around these families and make sure that they have what they need when they're experiencing that kind of trauma. By addressing systemic core issues, that's definitely something we are kind of in the middle of, and we like that opportunity. We like to be able to connect resources to one another and make sure that people are getting what they need, but also as social workers to look at where some of the systemic changes need to be, and some of the things that maybe we could be doing differently to make sure that families and victims are getting what they need as far as the overall system. A lot of people don't understand who charges people and who arrests people, and then who decides bond and who decides sentencing and those kinds of things. And sometimes our role is just to explain that those things that are going on, but also to be able to support families that are going through those systemic processes and help when those barriers come up as well. Reduce and prevent crime. That kind of goes back to the retaliation that we had talked about. Trying to be a proactive part in that. Oftentimes on the domestic violence side of things, that's helping relocate victims maybe, or getting ex parte orders and getting ex parte orders served. Just because one's been issued by a judge, they're actually not effective until that person has been served. So sometimes we will be actively involved in trying to figure out where the suspect is on that we can make sure that they're served, and make sure that our victims and our survivors know that at least this piece of that is in place and they're safe in that way. And then community policing, it looks different for every city. KCPD has a lot of programs. We have our community interaction officers, we have our police athletic league, us, crime-free multi-housing. We have a lot, but also just that these officers want to be involved in the communities that they work in. They want to have relationships with the people that they serve. You can see here, that's one of our tactical or our SWAT team captains. He met that little girl on her dog, Olaf, on a homicide scene. They weren't involved in the homicide, but they were a few houses down, and the little girl was out playing with her dog, and there we were doing a whole, murder investigation. And Captain went over and talked to her and spent some time with her, building a relationship with her and trying to kind of distract them from what was going on in a part of the city that's pretty riddled with violence. He actually ended up building her a dog house for Olaf and getting an agency called Chain of Hope involved, and they came out and brought them food and a leash and all these like things that this little girl needed to take care of her doggy. So those are things that officers were doing long before we had the social work program, but having us as a partner to be able to put some of those resources together and things like that and take those out to families and spend time with people in our community is a huge part of our job that we really enjoy. Sometimes we get requests for certain things, or we get kind of looped in on certain projects in COVID. A lot of the agencies that we work with, domestic violence shelters, children's shelters, elderly apartment living communities who rely on donations from places like Target and Walmart, because of the pandemic, weren't getting the resources that they would have otherwise had because those things simply weren't available. We couldn't go to the store to buy them, let alone having extras to donate to these agencies. So we partnered with the Veterans Community Project and were able to serve, I don't remember, I think 2,300 meals to across the community in about 4 weeks. So making sure that the Synergy Youth Center had trays of lasagna to be able to feed the kids that they have and those kinds of things. So we were just based on our ability to be flexible and being in the community, we were able to coordinate with other agencies and get connected to make sure that those things happened during a time that we wouldn't have thought that we would be the lunch people, but we made it happen. So as a social worker, we spend time with our officers, spend time with our police department family, and we get to know them and we get to learn about them and their lives and remember that they come to work to be police officers, but they're also human beings with wives and husbands and children and foster kids and hundreds of animals, goats and chickens and those kinds of things. And we get to develop relationships with our officers, and part of that partnership is built organically just from being in the car together and those kinds of things. So we'll kind of transition to talking about, as a social worker, seeing what's going on in our community right now, our concerns about what they're experiencing from a mental health standpoint and what the community is experiencing, and where we can, as social workers, kind of address maybe some of those things. So just want to warn you that the next video is a dash cam video. It's actually Officer Saragusa's dash cam video from an incident where he was shot at several times in a vehicle pursuit. So lots of sirens, kind of some yelling, because you'll hear the radio traffic back and forth, him trying to communicate with our dispatchers and trying to get more people out to help him. But if it's not something that you want to hear or see, please, it will not offend me if you wanted to mute it for, I think it's 58 seconds or something like that. So see if it'll work.
I think they're shooting at me now. Yep, they're firing at me. We're headed Martin Luther King, 66. It's a red car. Drop the assist. Okay, we're headed on Woodland from Dr. Martin Luther King. Passing 66 on Woodland. Occupied 3 times. 67. Have it take the car. They're firing. Get these cars down. High caliber weapons. We're headed eastbound. Give me some cars.
I wasn't sure how I do watching that sitting next to you. I was really worried. So how many times do you think they shot? Do you remember?
Oh, they shot 2 times with the pistol first, and then 5 more times when we rounded the corner, and then the AK-47 probably like 20 times.
Yeah. So that's an example, obviously, of the trauma that that police officers endure. Tells us that on average they experience more than 3 traumatic events every 6 months. On our heart border, 27 years. So I am a social worker. I do math. That's according to the results of traumatic event exposure for them nearly daily. And I think I don't know the research as far as the specific. You got it. Sorry. You're fine.
Okay, so sorry, everybody. We're going to get that screen back up. I believe it's this.
Yeah.
That looks correct.
Mm-hmm.
And yep, perfect. Awesome. All right, thanks.
2021, you know. Okay, so but while all those things are happening, they're assessing for threat not only to themselves but to the community. I mean, he's driving, that car's driving, that car shooting with no regard for any that they're shooting the police. It's like a 7-minute long video. I didn't want you to have to sit through all of it, but it ends in a safe car stop. Our TAC team eventually TVIs pitted out the vehicle and it ended resolved safely. But all throughout that time, not only is he having to put it out over the radio, explain what's happening, explain what he's seeing, trying to get more cars to him, assessing for the safety of the community that he's now driving through, and they're dealing with this, but also where they're driving and where they're going next, and how to try and bring that to a safe resolve. They spend all day at work doing that, assessing threat and safety from the start of the shift to the end of the shift. And then it's difficult to turn it off, right? It's difficult to turn it off at home. I know that we kind of joke with our officers sometimes when we go out we'll stop and get food, and we'll say, where do you want to sit? Because they want to sit at the very back of the restaurant with their back to the wall to assess threat for the whole time that they're sitting, and want to be able to see that the place that they're at. Let's see. There we go. The research also shows us that, you know, they are living in a constant state of hypervigilance. It makes them great at their jobs, makes it hard to do normal life sometimes. Hypervigilance plays a central role in PTSD by increasing a threat detection network and but also creates the potential for an error in interpretation of the evidence of suspected threat. So not only are they constantly on alert and assessing for threat, but that level of heightened hypervigilance, if it's not addressed properly, can put them in a situation where maybe they are misreading what's going on, or they're making choices that are adverse to their safety or other people's, because they stay at such a high constant level of hypervigilance. I like this information about anticipatory stress and anticipation of trauma have been noted to potentially lead to difficulty in decision making. That's all they do all day, right? Is anticipatory stress. From the second the call comes out from dispatch telling us where to go and what the call is, that information is coming from a 911 call. We don't know that it's correct. We don't know that it's accurate. More often than not, people tell us that he left northbound in a blue car when he's walking southbound, and the information is not always congruent. And so what they have to do is take the information that they're seeing on the computer and hearing from dispatch and the scene that they're arriving on, and make choices and make decisions very quickly to keep themselves and other people safe. Not unlike police officers is the general community that is living in these violent communities. They know when they can and can't go to certain gas stations and places that are not safe because of community violence. And you have individuals who are living in that same heightened sense of awareness, that same hypervigilance, not only in the communities that they're living in, because they're impacted by community violence, but also because of their concerns or their worries about interaction with the police, because their interaction with police tends to be in these violent situations. And so we've almost got like competing traumas, right? We've got hypervigilant police officers who have to be to stay safe, and they have to police in these areas that are hypervigilant community members because they're living in violent communities, not of any fault of their own, but because sometimes it's simply due to their income, or it's the one home that the family has had for 50 or 60 years, and that's where they can afford to live, and the area around them is violent, and that's of no fault of their own, but that's the reality of the place that they have to live. So they have to stay hypervigilant. They have to pay attention to what's going on, because situations like Alex, someone's driving through their neighborhood at 10 o'clock at night shooting at the police. So one of the things on the study that was done in Chicago, that just simply the exposure to police in communities sometimes is associated with an increase in the hypervigilance score. I think that this is a 2018 or 2019 study. So I think if we were to redo that, I think it would probably be higher if we're being realistic about that. But when we're talking about what PTSD looks like, or even just trauma exposure looks like, it's no way to tell the difference between these symptoms, whether they're impacting our police or our communities, our communities, especially that are riddled with violent crime. So when we're talking to people on scenes, or we're talking to people in the community as social workers, we want to be aware of that. When we're advocating for the community back to our police officers, or back to our city or our command staff, we want to be aware of those things too, that it's not necessarily an intentional, no one's reacting this way by choice, right? They've lived it in these communities, and they live in areas where at 3 a.m, they're waking up to sirens because there's another homicide, or there's another violent crime, or there's another assault. And they've learned to adjust to living that way, but it looks just like the way our officers have learned to adjust to working in their work environments. And so as we're talking about some of the changes and advocating for police reform or changes and those kinds of things. I think as social workers, it's one of our places to recognize that if we really were to take away the uniform or take away the clothing of someone and talk specifically just about their experiences, you've got very traumatized people interacting with one another over and over again. And if we can advocate for some of the changes that need to be made to make policing more aware of their own trauma, for starters, but also of that of the community, and how we can work together to figure out where those things are crossing, and maybe that we have more in common on that ground than not, and where we can make some changes to address the needs both of the community and of our police officers, so that we're not feeling this constant state of adversary, or because communities deserve the police. Victims of rape and domestic violence and assault and murder, they deserve justice, and they deserve to feel that when something horrible has happened to them, that people will respond and they will take care of the situation and they will act accordingly, because they deserve to be protected and they deserve to feel safe regardless of what, where they live in the city or what's going on in their communities. So if we can, as social workers in the police department, but also in the community, start advocating more for understanding how our communities are impacted by trauma and systemically, but also how our police officers are impacted by trauma. If we can start to kind of stand in the middle of that and advocate for both, I think we would be in a much better situation. Just some more information on PTSD and police officers. We know that their exposure to stress is obviously impacts their mental health, but also just the daily routine work environment. Just to be very frank, right now, it's not a good time to be a police officer. Everybody is pretty hard on them, and they're not getting a lot of the supports that they need, whether it's financially, budgetarily. I know KCPD is losing police officers at a record rate right now, because it just doesn't feel, you can only count on the soul of somebody to want to do something for so long. And so we need to be advocating for some changes that way too, so that as our officers are getting what they need and they're not as inundated with traumatic experiences, we're not going to be able to turn away 911 calls. Those are going to happen. But if within the police department structure, we can be more supportive of our police officers and the things that they need in the day-to-day, they're going to be more resilient in dealing with the things that they're impacted by at 911 calls, which is going to translate into their interaction with our community. Just as social workers, a couple of our ethics call us to, obviously, this is why we're here, to help people in need and to address social problems. I just think it's important that we recognize our police officers are included in that. They're people, and they work in a high stress and high trauma environment, and we want to be supportive of them, again, because that then overflows and impacts our community. So if we're supporting them and we're bringing what they need, our communities are also in turn going to get what they need from the police. And then the importance of human relationships. Our officers know the communities that they patrol. Alex is one of my partners I ride with, and then another set of officers that I ride with grew up in about 10 blocks from the station that we work at. They know everybody at the gas station. They know so-and-so's mom and that guy's sister, and they know the communities that they work in, and their relationships in the communities are important. They want those relationships. They want to have interactions with the people that they serve, because we want people to feel like they can call the police and that they want to call the police when something's happening in their community that makes them feel unsafe. One of our, also in the code of ethics, just interdisciplinary collaboration and the importance of, how our interdisciplinary collaboration and working together impacts the well-being of our clients. For us as police department social workers, that's the community, the people that we work with, and we interact with a lot of systems, Port, Children's Division, Rosebrooks, and we're pretty systemically intertwined, which is the benefit of as social workers, we're trained that way, and we're a part of that world. And we know also, though, when those things are not the way that they should be, or when we could do things better, our job also is to advocate for those changes. I am obviously a police department social worker. I support my police officers, but I also recognize the places that we can change. We recognize the places where the way that we interact with communities or the things that we end up having to do out in the community can really really have long lasting impacts on individuals and neighborhoods and communities that we serve. One thing I think we could benefit from is looking at bringing our community partners to the table and looking at ways that we can take things off of the police department. Unfortunately, systemically, we've kind of created a situation where the entry into services a lot of times is through law enforcement. In order to get into mental health court, we've had to write a ticket or 2 or 5 and suggested mental health court, when really are there other options? Are there other ways that people can get the paid services that they need that don't have to come through consistent documented contact with us? Same thing with drug court. There's some talk now about not prosecuting certain narcotics charges and those kinds of things. And I absolutely see a certain side of that, but also it's difficult because we've got it set up so that those individuals have to be charged with some of those crimes in order to get into drug court. I love drug court. I think treatment court's important, but I don't know if necessarily that's the best route either. So if we can start working collaboratively as community partners and community social workers, police officers, the city, to really look at what sits on police officers' plates and things that they end up having to be the ones to start the process for people to get the services they need. If we can take some of those things off their plate or give them some different supports and different services, the community will see less of us in certain situations like that feel vulnerable or feel adversarial. And that would give us an opportunity to have more time to focus on violent crime necessarily, but also to interact with the community and to be there for them in a supportive role rather than an enforcement role. And then I know I've said it several times, but that as we're advocating for police reform or advocating for change for interactions between police and the community, we really need to be advocating for their mental health too, for the supports that they need, for the time off following, violent events, or the crisis debrief options for them, and things that, in my personal social work opinion, need to come from outside of the department. People are well-meaning, I think, in working with first responder mental health and wanting, but I don't know necessarily that our HR guy at the department needs to be the one doing those things. I think we need trauma trained, individuals such as most of you all who, can really address the physiological need, the emotional need, how that spills over into your homes and into your families and those kinds of things. So just as we're advocating for changes in the police department, which need to happen, and we need to make some changes and need to do a lot of things differently or better, just remembering that also that involves, the research shows us that involves advocating for them and for their mental health and getting them what they need, which in turn trickles down to making the community safer and the community more trusting and rebuilding that trust in law enforcement. We'll take questions. Oh yeah, sorry. And then our last code word is going to be department embedded, just sort of how we talked about CIT co-responders or children's division or Rosebrooks people being contracted or affiliated with the police department is different than how our program is department embedded, in that we are employed through the department specifically for the needs of the community. I just chat. Perfect. That's better. All right.
Yeah, if you guys have any questions for me or anything too on how it works, I'll just say, we go on a lot of calls and sometimes we get kind of stuck with well, this isn't really a police matter, or, we only get about 20 minutes or so on a call to handle something that might be a really long-term problem for this person. And it just gives us a resource that we can go to, where Lindsay has she's a network of every single resource we could possibly think of. And all we got to do is just refer them to her and she figures it out. And it kind of takes that stress off of us, and it helps them out. And also she'll come out to homicide scenes and kind of see what the family of the victim, or maybe some witnesses or family of even the suspect, might need. And whenever she helps them, that helps them want to cooperate with the police, helps us further build trust with them. And also that creates them wanting to work with us and then solve that crime?
Oh, what does self-care look like? This is where I'm not a good social worker. We've actually been really focused on that a lot in our program lately. We're working on an on-call rotation right now with one of us at each division on a 24-hour operation. It can be a little overwhelming. So working on having an on-call rotation so that I know when I go home and go play tennis or go to the dog park or do whatever, that somebody somewhere is answering the phone for them, even if it's not me. That they know that they can call and have somebody that is going to have an answer for them or respond to them, but that we get to turn it off too for a little bit. For me, self-care is my dog, Barkay. We love to do that, those kinds of things. Spending time with family. We do tend to be very close friends with one another, but sometimes we have to be mindful of spending time all together where we just go sit and talk about work again, and we're just kind of regurgitating that over and over again. So spending time with our work friends while also being able to say we're not talking about work right now is an important boundary too. What about self-care for you?
Dog park. Dog park. Definitely keeping we always say, and they told us in the academy, is to keep your civilian friends. I keep a lot of friends that aren't police officers, kind of to go off what she was saying. Like, you just want to be able to disconnect, and that's sometimes the hardest thing is this job does kind of bleed over, especially when, every time you get on social media or the news or something, you get wrapped right into it with some kind of issue with policing that's going on, whether it's local news, national news, anything. You just it's hard lately to disconnect, but it's just nice to have social worker if we're ever struggling or something. They can always give us resources too. I mean, they're there for us and the community.
Oh man, that's a really good question. To just be really frank, I don't think that officers are comfortable seeking that support necessarily right now, just in the way the structure is set up, because they're answering to people on the department. And it's, there's sort of this old school mentality of, if you come forward and you need help, they're going to say that you're not fit for duty. And then, are you on the desk? They take your badge, they take your gun. There's a lack of, I think, perceived at least lack of control over once they come forward and say that they need help, what are their options for that? So I think there are some agencies in the city that have started to take on our EAP program and becoming providers for our police officers, so that they know that they have a HIPAA protected place to go to talk and have these conversations that doesn't get kicked back to the department or anything like that. I think that's a huge thing. Our police union right now is advocating to kind of copy off of our fire department, our fire union, Local 42. Their union has they have 2 clinical social workers that work for their union. And so it's not unusual for firefighters to be in and out of the union hall. So no one really knows why they're popping in there, whether it's business or something else, or they're seeing their therapist. That's it's billed through their insurance, but it's located at the union hall. And so it is separate from the city, and the city can't get that information, and the city doesn't have access to that. So they're getting the mental health support that they need in a setting that's comfortable to them. They don't, and I think our police union right now is advocating for that. And I think that's a huge thing for us, that our union would then have providers for officers so that it would be separate from the city. I think advocating also looks like kind of having these conversations that that their traumatic exposure does impact the way that they work with people, and that if we can get them what they need as far as mental health supports, then the way that it is impacting our communities and the way that's going to impact the interactions that we have with people every day. And then I don't know, I think just having more, like you guys, these trauma trained individuals. I think there's a lack of understanding necessarily in police and fire that there is a specificity to that. There is a specific training, and there's specific knowledge and experience that goes along with treating these complex long-term trauma exposure individuals, whether that's police, fire, military, nurses, those kinds of things. It's just clinically, it's a different level. And I think For those of you who are trained that way and you have that information, that's a way to advocate, is just, that that is a specific need, and that it's a specific thing that we need people who are trained to deal with that or address that need to be the ones that are doing that kind of work.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. There's kind of a beginning to be shift in policing on like kind of changing that old style mentality of get back on the horse, don't talk about it. Definitely the police officer suicides have been rampant, and that's kind of waking up a lot of departments. I don't remember the person's name, but there was a speaker who was talking to a group of police officers, and she was like, think how much training you've received on like active shooters, going to domestic violence calls and things like that. And she's like, but how much training have you received for the thing that threatens you most, which is suicide? Most cops have died from that. And so I think maybe adding some training in the academy, which might help just kind of with coping. We didn't get any really training on how to cope with seeing trauma and stuff like that. They train you on all this other stuff, but they don't really train you with that. It is getting better. They're starting to realize it, but that's definitely something for sure.
For sure. I don't think we have any extras. Awesome. Thank you guys for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you, Lindsay and Alex. Our next presentation will start in about 30 minutes. It'll start at 4, so we'll come back around 3:55. Enjoy. It starts at 3. I'm sorry, it starts at 3. So we'll come back around 2:55. Appreciate it.